Hello, friends. My name is Host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Defense People and the primary party behind defensible typology, the most correct understanding of both type and human consciousness available anywhere. I made this table today, and it's really a taxonomy of the types into within a certain frame of reference. It's exchangeable within the system because I define my terms meaningfully. The terms here, in this instance, universal refers to NE and I, particular refers to SESI. Negators are TI above, and the 1, 2, initially. Affirmers are FI, solvers are TE, and teamers are FE, okay? So what I've done here is I've first put a table here that views the types by configuration. So you could call the NTPs, ENTPs and INTPs, universal negators. We want to negate on the top level of frame. Particular negators would be ESTPs and ISTPs. They negate on a particular level. In other words, an example, this is my daughter's an ESTP. She and I disagreed about certain things on COVID. Primarily, her indication that I should get the vaccine no matter what, because even if it protects me just a fraction of a little bit, that it's worth, it's better than nothing because she doesn't want me to die. Okay. Me, I say, no, we don't want to validate nonsense with our behavior. But regardless, universal affirmers are ENFPs and INFPs. FI is an affirmational kind of function because you need that subjective deliberation to know what's most important to you. And then you affirm that. You can also see in ENFPs especially the tendency towards affirming their feelings as political policies. Particular affirmers are ESFPs then and ISFPs. They affirm particularist things. They're not talking about the universalist stuff usually. And when they do, they treat it as though it were a particularist matter, not that as though it cascaded down. That's ESFPs especially, maximally so, because their deliberation is a tool function. But ISFPs as well. Universal solvers are INTJs and ENTJs. Particular solvers are ESTJs and ISTJs. So ENTJs, INTJs, they want solvency for top level problems. They can cascade down impact wise. They don't cascade as rules, but they cascade impact potentially. So whoever invented the say dishwasher, they had a long set of cascading impacts impacting everybody in the world who bought a dishwasher, but no cascading rules. It's not the case that everybody uses a dishwasher now. It's not the case that it's always a good idea to use your dishwasher instead of some alternative means of cleaning the dishes, etc. Okay, so a universal solver, though, will solve a universal problem like, how can we get dishes cleaned more efficiently? Whereas a particular solver will solve particular problems like, how can we get these dishes cleaned more efficiently? Universal team people are ENFJs and INFJs. And particularist team people are ESFJs and ISFJs. So now let's look at those same things, but we're going to view them as absolute values instead of 1, 2 slot things. Okay, so the types objectively, the person as an object of analysis, objectively, if you external parties view them correctly, understanding these terms, understanding that this is, even if you just view it as a taxonomy, this is how we're dividing things into, then ENTPs and INTPs are most correctly viewed by other people as universal negators, right? But they don't view themselves that way necessarily. And that's because people tend to view themselves as ultimately serving the goal of their absolute values, first and third especially, even though they may not be executing in the specifics of that third function in ways that are working very well. They nevertheless view themselves ultimately in service of those absolute values, and as a consequence, fundamentally more that person, right? So for that, in that regard, it's the ISTPs and INFJs who view themselves as universal negators, ISFJs, INTPs, particular negators, ISFPs, INTJs, universal affirmers. So INTJ with NI first, FI third. Being a solver means they're solving particularist and universalist problems, but being a universalist solver means they'd like to solve problems on the biggest level. But with that, the purpose of that is because not because they want to prevent wrongness, but because they want to facilitate positives, right? So INTJs view themselves accordingly. They don't view themselves through the TE lens of solvency. They view themselves through the FI and NI lens of what's authentically important universally, and therefore that I can affirm, either as a particular course of action or as an affirmation in general. So universal solvers, ENFPs, and ESTJs. And you can see how this gets them both into problems, because neither of them is very well equipped to be universalist solvers at all, because neither of them has epistemologically a universal deliberation or knowledge function up high in the stack, right? So if you get, say, President Trump, well, he is in fact a particular affirmer, but he views himself as a particular solver. Now, if you get an ESFP who nowhere there at all has universal solvency, and you put them in a position like the president, they're going to try to solve particular problems, and they're going to do so by particularly affirming things, and they're not going to care at all about any universalist negations or even particularist negations. So, anyway, the other particular solver reviewed by absolute value is ENTJs. They're a little bit better equipped, because it's always easier to go from universalist to particularist than the other direction, right? You know, if you're universally understanding what's going to work in the highest level, then you can probably direct your attention more successfully than, say, other people with the third slot value towards solving things in the particular. That's why ENTJs accomplish so many particular things, but aren't necessarily worth listening to regarding universalist matters, even though they may solve universalist problems successfully. Then we've got here universal team people. By a self-concept, it's ENTP and ESFJ. ESFJ is actually a particularist team person, as you see up here. Objectively is. Not actually, but objectively, right? These are not, objective isn't correct, subjective isn't wrong. The full understanding of the person incorporates both angles of perspective, right? And it turns out that particularist team people who view themselves as team players for this team or that team, are ESTP and ENFJ, even though other people will view ESTPs as particularist negators and ENFJs as universalist team people. They view themselves as having something to say about this particular team for sure, or being a good team player for this particular team, even if they're not really, right? ESTPs, same thing. Now, ESTPs are more likely to actually be good players for this particular team, because their particularist is consistent between the two tables here, right? All right, now let's look at reciprocating hidden agendas. This might be the same table as a table of mirage relationships in sociology. Socionics. But I'm not sure if it is, actually. So if you look at these tables and say, who has reciprocal mias? So in the table number 1, ENTP is a universal negator. And in table number 2, ENTP is a universal team player. In table number 1, INFJ is a universal team player, and INFJ is a universal negator in team 2. So it's reciprocal. Both people have the other table, right? So for the universal negators, universal team players, that's ENTP, INFJ. For particular negators, particular team players, that's ESTP, ISFJ. For universal affirmers and universal solvers, that's ENFP and INTJ. For particular affirmers and particular solvers, that's ESFP and ISTJ. For universal solvers and particular solvers, that's ENTJ and ESTJ. For universal teams and particular teams, that's ENFJ, ESFJ. And for universal negators and particular negators, it's INTP, ISTP. And for particular affirmers and universal affirmers, that's ISFP and INFP. So in the objective of understanding, INFPs, for example, are universal affirmers. They want to affirm stuff that cascades down, that applies broadly. But they view themselves as being insightful about what to affirm in the particular, even though, objectively, if you look at them, they're SE polar and their reliance on these vague and shifting subjective feelings to make decisions means they're not very well equipped to particularly affirm anything. They're just more well equipped to universally affirm things that can't possibly cascade down in the way that universal logic can, right? But nevertheless, may be informative about what's important in the world. Now, what you see here is you've got 6 of the 8 things have the particularist and the N. I mean, the particularist universalist the same. UU, PP, UU, PP, USPS. So that one's different. UTPT, that one's different. I was wrong. 4 and 4, actually. 4 and 4. So 4 of them are split between U and P, and 4 of them are the same with the U and P. So what do we take away from all of this? Well, I'm not sure, except my hypothesis might be that having these reciprocating hidden agendas, which is to say, basically you're looking at the absolute value that differs from the tool function, the instrumental value, the absolute value implied by the instrumental tool function, and pairing that with the first slot function, and looking at those two as absolute values, then you see that the person I am, the person I want to be, Rachel is what I want to be. I am what Rachel wants to be, or more correctly, what we view ourselves as. Because, well, Rachel may be objectively a great universal team player. That is to say, she applies universal cascading rules regarding how to engage with people. And she additionally, as a tool function, avoids putting herself at vulnerability to critique for not being a team player, right? She takes a lot of prevent defense against that. In reality, I don't play any prevent defense against that, or very little. I don't actually express as very much of a team player. I'm very confrontational with people I disagree with sometimes, etc., right? But if I don't validate adequately as a team player, and if I ultimately can't find my solvency via FE, that is to say, by bringing people together around the truth in order to prosper and be happy and good and righteous and correct about things, then ultimately I'll become sort of disillusioned / sad or, emotionally, whatever. Because like the most bitter possible ENTP would be somebody who's been compelled into an sort of INTP, anti-countervaluing expression by circumstances that are oppositional to their native optimism. Viewing yourself as a universal team player involves native optimism. You're assuming that if we can really communicate and and understand each other, then we'll all be on the same page, because the problem here isn't exactly that some particular person is wrong, but rather that people aren't agreeing to agree. You know, there's this expression, let's agree to disagree. It's a terrible expression. No, if we disagree, let's resolve the disagreement by determining who's correct. For most matters that involve communication between people, which is the only way that conflict really ever happens, then it's true what I'm saying, right? That if we would allow ourselves to communicate honestly and openly and about things, then we should be broadly in disagreement, except for the small percentage of the population that's like wicked, like expressly evil, trying to be bad. So we should be all on the same page, like as Americans, for example. I know not everybody watching this video is an American, but because we're all on the same team, we're all Americans. We should all be patriots, and do the best for our country, and be proud of the fact that we live in a free and civil society, and work together towards the country's good ends. Instead, we have two political parties, that, because of the nature of strategizing and solvency and stuff, have resorted to rhetorical techniques increasingly that have been served only to divide the country further and further from each other, even though the divide is actually very small, right? But perceptually, it's massive. So you've got, in reality, everybody treating each other basically as neighbors and being good citizens and agreeing broadly on primary values, what's important. But what you also have are these differing ways of engaging in the world. So, you've got particular affirmers, for example, who view themselves as potentially universal affirmers, or potentially as particular solvers. So really, they should be affirming what they find important to them, but they view themselves as having solvency for this particular problem, probably more so than they actually do. It depends on the circumstances, right? Like my ESFP realtor had great particular solvency because that was his job. And it gave him a lot of satisfaction, I think, to solve real estate problems that would drive me insane, right? But you wouldn't want him even attempting to solve universal problems. He wouldn't view himself as being useful as such. And you got to remember that fundamentally their MO is going to be always to affirm particular things, not fundamentally the way of going about business is to actually solve real problems with real solutions. They have to be operating in a very narrowly defined context in order for that to work, as per realtor, right? So you've got somebody like me who is a universal negator, but who views himself, and because he's old, wise, actualized, whatever, understands himself to be, also because of cognitive functions mostly, a universal team player, and recognizes that in order to really be fulfilled in life, I'm going to have to express myself accordingly. I'm going to have to successfully bring people together, not merely explain why the divide exists. And it's one of the many reasons why it's good for me to be with Rachel, who helps just by being herself to model for me what a professional universal team player looks like, rather than a hobby universal team player like me, and vice versa. She gets to see me model what a universal negator looks like, which makes her natural universal team playeriness much more robust and powerful, because she's endowed with top level NI understandings that can help explain why somebody else is not being a team player, help her understand conceptually her own vulnerability to being moved kind of non-consensually via FE shit, right? Etc. So I think reciprocating hidden agendas, whether it's the mirage type or whatever they call it in in socionics, or whether it's even the thing I'm doing here is even specifically referenced in inner types. I don't know, but it seems like this is a very good relationship, because if the things are reciprocal, then that same thing with me and Rachel happens with them. One of them's a professional at what the other one wants to be. Because they're an actual professional at it, they don't feel threatened at all in any of that stuff. And they're modeling how to do it well for this person who wants to be a professional. And it reciprocates. So I think that's the message of this video. Anything else is just rambling on. Bye. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese. And don't forget, if your typology is not defensible, throw it in the garbage can.